Hello, you are watching Hero Haven. On April 28th, we will likely say goodbye to dreams of a sequel to the Zack Snyder Universe. DC is rebooting, and the WB who gave the green light to hold the event only to put a bold end to the story. It won't be final. We all know how quickly the movie world changes executives, but still, for now, officially, the universe ends. Let's take a look back at the great times from where it all started in the first place. In the next couple of minutes, we'll dive into the behind-the-scenes events. Man of Steel, the legitimate rise of the Snyder Universe, and its unfair fall. And in the comments, we await your impressions of the trilogy. This is the first big moment. Video Snyder shared the comic's Kona poster on his Twitter, and it mentions for the first time the official name of his universe as agreed to by Warner Brothers. Now, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League are the Snyder version trilogy. This moment is important because the poster was coordinated with the WB, and this is generally the first time in history that the DC Director's Universe has been given a name, even while Snyder was still listed as the boss. There was no term like MCU for DC. Gunn's new universe has it, which will be called DCU. What Snyder did was nameless for a long time, and at the end of its journey, the Warner Brothers finally acknowledged the director's merits. But where did it all start? Suddenly, with Christopher Nolan in the early 2000s, DC was developing a Batman v Superman movie. It was supposed to be directed by the legendary creator of Troy, Wolfgang Peterson, but Nolan knocked on the chat room and his look won over the boss at DC. The original plan was to launch two separate Dark Knight and Man of Steel franchises, and then Christopher Nolan's epic Batman crossover took off. Bryan Singer's 2006 Superman didn't sit well with Nolan, so much so that he vetoed any use of Christian Bale in DC's murky projects. Studio bosses didn't get upset long and let Mad Max creator George Miller write his own version of the Justice League movie and choose his own Batman. Armie Hammer became him, and production on the project went far enough. A full cast was assembled, locations were booked, and sequels were planned. But a writer's strike began in the background, and George Miller was suddenly, even to himself, fired. The filmmakers now talk about the shock they felt and the resentment. The laid-down forces of the film, according to him, were ready to start shooting even tomorrow, but it turned out as it turned out. In the end, Christopher Nolan took the stage again. He and one of the Dark Knight's writers, David Goyer, went to DC and suggested they create a Superman franchise in their image. That is, a down-to-earth, realistic version of Clark Kent without the underpants over tights and jokes over 200. DC liked the idea, and Goyer started writing such a movie himself. Nolan advised the studio to hire Zack Snyder as a man of honor and sufficient style. Close to that, in 2010, Snyder got the director's chair, and for some time with Nolan, there was a long discussion of a crossover between Crested Bale and Henry Cavill, who got the role of the new Superman. There is often evidence of a conflict between the directors, with Nolan allegedly not wanting the crossover and Snyder badly needing it. In reality, both directors state that they synchronously liked the idea at first and then rejected it together. The key point is that Nolan and Snyder were also unanimous on the question of continuing the franchise. They both wanted to see a few Superman solos first and then Justice League and other projects. We'll come back to that point. But for now, let's also remember Ryan Reynolds and his Green Lantern movie. Nolan and Snyder weren't particularly interested, but the studio still pushed through the decision that it would be Reynolds' project that would start the new film universe. How it ended, everyone remembers very well. But it's funny that at the time of release, Reynolds played in the same universe, which was later joined by Gal Gadot, Ben Affleck, and other actors. They took him out of canon post facto after he failed. And Snyder brought out Man of Steel in 2013. That's where the first tiff with Christopher Nolan happened. Even though Zack didn't write the script, he insisted on including General Zod's murder scene in the film. The ending was originally planned to send Golden into the negative zone. But Snyder changed the script to put Superman at the maximum disadvantage in the ending. According to the director, this was required to ground the Man of Steel and create a complex moral dilemma for an infinitely strong character. Nolan was very much against his idea. Again, rumors will tell you that the filmmakers even had a falling out. But in reality, Snyder and Nolan were and still are best friends. Nolan arranged a special screening of The Argument for Zack, who in turn showed his version of Justice League. Both filmmakers have nothing but compliments for each other, and why exactly Christopher left DC we'll tell you a little later. For now, let's remember what that very decision by Snyder to kill General Zod led to. All the same critics who now demand that movies not follow patterns and depart from canon with invincible white men, in 2013, criticized the man who became a wreck for departing from canon and not following a pattern. It is especially ironic that in order to choose whose Khan would be in a Nolan or Snyder film, screenwriter David Goyer went directly to the comic book authors. The decisive argument was their approval, since in the comics, Superman kills a lot, and the scene, no matter how you look at it, makes a lot of sense. Anyway, the critics didn't listen to it as vehemently then, and looking at the financial success and good reviews from the audience, Snyder extended his work. Here begins the funniest, murkiest, and few really know the part of the story. Officially, the masses are of the following opinion. Snyder and Nolan wanted to make Man of Steel 2 movies before moving on to Batman, but WB insisted on the more hype Batman vs. Superman. Oh, and it also didn't take Christian Bale, after which Nolan bombed and left. Snyder reluctantly took the job. The studio mutilated his movie, and it came out so bad. Even Nolan supposedly heckled Ben Affleck's version for being killed off by Batman. In reality, things were a little more complicated. First, according to Jay Oliva, the Batman vs. Superman artist, the first drafts are dark encounters between the two characters. Snyder asked to do 4 months before Man of Steel's release. Secondly, in his first interview after the film's premiere, Snyder stated that if there was a sequel, it would feature Batman. Thirdly, Nolan was the producer of Batman v Superman, and the idea of the Man of Steel dying in the ending came from him. It was Nolan who gave the go-ahead for Superman's death by approving this storyline. And that, yes, the transformation of Man of Steel to Batman vs. Superman is WB's fault. In another, Snyder really wanted to show the Dark Knight in the film, but still positioned it as a sequel to Superman with all that entails. There were hints of Brainiac as the main villain, and the undeniable protagonist was Clark Kent. All WB did was put a little pressure on Snyder to increase Ben Affleck's role in the film. To go along with that in 2014, announcing its changed title. That's generally not a problem. The problem is that along with that, in the old tradition of 2014, WB sold the announcement of 14 movies at once, for a good half of which no one, not Snyder, would have been ready yet. The Flash and Wonder Woman, still from 2012 to 2016, managed to change 4 writers. Cyborg and the Green Lantern Corps weren't even in the outline. Well, to develop from scratch 2 Justice League movies in 2 years, working on a Batman solo and a bunch of other projects at the same time, even Kevin Feige would not have been able to. This is where Nolan Odessi broke away. There's no official comment on it, but it's not hard to guess that the director was pampered by the studio's ambitions and realized that what he was being offered was taking an excessive high. There's also objectively Snyder's fault. He was just a whiner, but he agreed to become the head of such an ambitious universe. Although, in retrospect, it is clear that this deflection under the studio was the key. Having bent once, Snyder opened the door for WB to bend itself with the cutting of Batman v Superman and the constant edits. They were the ones who killed the laughs over Ben Affleck's failed ratings, forcing him to leave. There, quickly enough, everyone liked his Batman. However, the theatrical version caused a rift in the community, mostly because of the unfortunate Martha plot and the incomprehensible abrupt change in Batman's mood. Even so, the commercial film proved to be very strong, breaking even and coming out in the box office in a small surplus. To be clear, the budgets of Batman v Superman and Civil War, released the same year, were the same, and Snyder's film collected only 25% less money, given that Marvel had already released 2 Avengers films by that time and had the most popular actor on the planet as an asset. The gap looks quite logical. Nevertheless, to this day, Batman v Superman, for some reason, is considered a failure. And plus, Warner Brothers was expecting a much fatter debut. Africa. Though, in its time, the first part of Christopher Nolan's Batman made a measly $373 million at the box office. And by tradition, WB blamed it not on the crooked idiots who brought in Snyder's version of rights, but on Snyder himself. The stupidity of the WB management did not change. Even the release of the extended version of Batman v Superman, the same one that Snyder originally wanted to show in theaters, It came out literally 3 months after its premiere in July 2016, and 90% of critics reshopped, giving the film the highest marks, because this version preserved all the side storylines, revealing both the motivation of Superman and the full plan of Lex Luthor to pitting two heroes. The identity of the idiot who on a flat place decided to cut 30 key minutes from the theater version. Batman v Superman remains unknown to this day, but it bombed poor screenwriter Chris Terrio, so much so that he called the situation sabotage back in 2016. There's more. Because by the time the film was released, Justice League was almost complete. The film was about to go into post-production. Snyder, despite the death of his daughter, continued to work. But apparently the unnamed genius at WB wanted to make his own changes to the League. So Snyder went nuts and left the project, citing family reasons and a desire to honor his daughter. Joss Whedon replaced him, and WB invested a lot of money into PR of his version, flooding the internet with fakes that Whedon is Snyder's close friend and reworked his version. We believed in these fakes in its time, simply because you cannot lie so openly to the whole world. As it turned out, you can. And Frankenstein, made by Whedon, came out not bad, but frankly sterile and unfinished in some places. The film is watchable, but it was definitely expected to be better. The result? A box office failure and dozens of scandals. It turned out that Whedon on the set of openly ridiculed the work of actors, mocked Gal Gadot, and cracked jokes about the original screenplay Snyder, who, to his credit, has remained ironclad silent on this issue. Only Christopher Nolan, who advised Noyd not even to try to watch the version given by Whedon, was not silent. And it's understandable why. When the real version of Snyder's Justice League was released in 2021, everything fell into place. The 4-hour epic left neither critics nor viewers indifferent. On top of all that, the director also finished 20 minutes of extra footage with teasers of what was to happen in Justice League 2 and other projects. The funny thing is that Wonder Woman and Aquaman, created with Snyder's most fervent participation, were not under the WB scissors and became hits. They made great money and everyone liked them, being a prime example of the influence on the film industry. One such film is Wonder Woman 2, which was created by all the same people, but without the participation of Zack. It turned out to be something beautiful. We remember very well, and we also remember how DC management changed 10 times, releasing then Birds of Prey, then Black Adam, then Suicide Squad 2. The first part of that movie, by the way, calling it a Snyder Universe project, is also worth the caveat, because the movie originally looked very different. There was Steppenwolf, a couple of demons, and a very different storyline, which may well be something we'll see in the arcade someday. That's another story, but ours is that, at least by 2023, even WB recognized Snyder's merits and let him release the trilogy in pristine directorial form. Whatever the joke the studio is, it should be thanked for that. After all, one way or another on the original version of the films we did get to see. Truly, it is twice as sad, because everything depends on the genius who cut 30 minutes from Batman vs. Superman for some reason. That's when it all went downhill from there. An entire universe with a dozen actors, writers, producers, and workers entered an era of turbulence that still hasn't ended. Will it end with Jameson's arrival? We'll see.